He already knew which 10 of them would not make it back. That wasn't an estimate. It wasn't a pessimistic calculation born from fatigue or the particular gray cold that settles into a command tent at 3 in the morning. Major Aldrich Wenn had done the actual mathematics. Routes, response time, the number of working vehicles versus the number of bodies that needed to move, and 10 was the number he kept arriving at. He folded the map. He did not share this with anyone. The forward operating base at Dunmore Ridge sat at an elevation that made satellite communication unreliable and helicopter extraction almost impossible when the weather closed in, which it did, with a particular spite of northern mountain ranges, approximately every 48 hours. They had been up there for 11 days. The weather had closed in 4 times. Nobody had come. What they did have, and Wenn counted this with the same methodical care he had counted everything else, was specialist Tara Lund. She had arrived 9 days earlier, on the last resupply run before the pass became impassable, and she had arrived quietly with a single hard case that she carried herself and placed under her bunk without being asked, and a second bag that contained exactly what the manifest said it contained and nothing else. She had introduced herself to Wenn, to Sergeant Breck Holloway, and to no one else. She had then spent the better part of her first afternoon sitting outside on a low equipment crate, looking at the valley below with nothing in her hands. Holloway had asked Wenn what she was doing. Looking, Wenn said. At what? Wenn didn't answer because he didn't know yet, and he had long since stopped offering explanations for things he didn't understand. What Tara Lund was doing, though she would not have described it this way to anyone, was reading the terrain the way other people read a room when they walk into it for the first time. Taking in the geometry of it, the distance ratios, the way light moved across the eastern face of the ridge in the late afternoon, and through the lower approach road into variable shadow from approximately 1620 onward. She was filing it, not writing anything down, just filing it, the way she had been filing things since she was a girl in a flat farming town outside of Lethbridge, Alberta, where there was nothing to look at except long distances. And so she had learned, very young, to look at them carefully. The convoy that changed everything appeared on the morning of day 3, after her arrival, which was day 12 overall, which was 4 days past the point where Wenn's resupply timeline had officially collapsed. It appeared first as dust, visible at approximately 8 kilometers out, and then as the distinctive profile of armored vehicles moving in column formation. Not quickly, because the road didn't allow it, but steadily, with the particular patience of a force that knows the people it is coming for have nowhere to go. Holloway counted them. He counted them again. He reported 11 vehicles to Wenn, and then, a moment later, revised that to 13 when 2 more emerged from behind the tree line on the lower switchback. Wenn looked at the count, looked at what they had available, and said nothing for approximately 4 seconds, which was a long time for Wenn. "Get Lund," he said. She was already at the observation post when Holloway found her, which should not have been possible because the observation post was 200 meters from where anyone had last seen her. She was lying flat on a foam pad she had apparently brought herself, and she had her spotting scope out, and she was working through the column methodically from rear to front, vehicle by vehicle, counting things Holloway couldn't see. "Commander Wenn wants to know our options," Holloway said. "The lead vehicle has a cracked differential housing," Lund said without looking up. "You can see it in the track pattern. It's pulling left on downhill grade. If it stalls at the Narrows," she moved the scope 3 degrees. "That's the Narrows, between that rock outcropping and the drainage cut. Then the column loses forward movement. They can't pass it. They can't easily reverse on that grade. They stop." Holloway looked at the Narrows. Then he looked at where the vehicle was. Then he said, "That's 4 kilometers, out of 4.3. Our best shooter can't." "I know," she said. "That's not what I said. I said if it stalls at the Narrows." He waited. "It won't stall on its own," she said. "But differentials under that kind of stress respond to specific load changes. If the driver accelerates into a downhill turn instead of braking, any driver will do that if they believe they're under fire from a closer position than they actually are." She paused. The human ear localizes sound direction with about 10 to 15 degrees of accuracy under stress. Less when there's echo interference. She gestured at the eastern face without looking at it. There's a lot of rock face over there. Holloway took a moment with this. You're describing a shot that makes them think it came from somewhere it didn't come from. I'm describing two shots, she said. The first one is to create that impression. The second one is the one that matters. He went back and told Wenn. Wenn asked two questions. Has she done this before? And how long does she need? And when Holloway gave the answers, which were she wouldn't say and 90 minutes, Wenn looked at the approaching column and then said, give her what she asks for. What she asked for was relatively little, the exact coordinates of the observation post, which Holloway had to get from the communications officer, Corporal Desta Ahrens, who provided them along with an expression that suggested she wanted to ask what they were for and had decided not to. Lund also asked for the morning weather data, specifically wind speed and direction at 3 elevations, ridge level, valley floor, and the midpoint, which Ahrens pulled from the automated sensor array with increasing mystification, and she asked, finally, for the hard case under her bunk. Nobody touched it. Price, who was the youngest member of the team and had been working very hard since Lund's arrival to appear as though he was not watching her constantly, went and got it and brought it to the observation post and set it down 6 feet from her. He had been hoping she might explain something. She said, thank you, and waited until he was gone. Inside the case was a rifle that Holloway, when he finally saw it 3 hours later, would describe to Sergeant Major Dex Carville as nothing like what I expected. This was because he had expected something that looked like a weapon designed for the specific purpose she was using it for, long, heavy, dramatic. What it looked like instead was a rifle that had been very carefully thought about by someone who was going to have to carry it long distances on foot, and who had made every decision accordingly. She had built parts of it herself, not the barrel, she wasn't a machinist, but the rest of it, the stock configuration, the adjustable cheek piece, the scope mounting, had all been modified over years to fit her specifically. It fit her the way custom boots fit a person who spends their life walking. She settled into position and began the process that looked, from any reasonable external vantage point, like nothing at all. The convoy was at 6 kilometers, then 5.5. The lead vehicle, the one with the differential, was behaving exactly as she had predicted, its left track slightly erratic on the steeper downhill sections. She watched it, and she made calculations that she did not write down because she did calculations the same way she made observations. She stored them, continuously updated them, let the newer data revise the older. The wind at ridge level was running at 11 kilometers per hour from the northwest. At valley floor, it was running at approximately 7 from the west-northwest. At midpoint, based on what she could observe of the sparse tree-line disturbance, it was variable, possibly 8, possibly 9, with a tendency to gust slightly on the 2-minute cycle that matched the updraft pattern off the eastern rock face. Ahrens, who had been watching this process for 40 minutes from a respectful distance, eventually sat down on a rock and stopped pretending to do anything else. At 4.8 kilometers, Lund took the first shot. The report of it, in the open air of the ridge, was sharp and then immediately complicated by the echo off the eastern face. It split into 2 distinct sounds separated by approximately half a second, so that it arrived at the valley floor, sounding like 2 shots from 2 different elevations, neither of which was where she actually was. The convoy reacted. They reacted exactly the way she had said they would. The driver of the lead vehicle accelerated, because the human response to apparent close-range engagement is to push through, to create distance from the perceived source of fire, and the road ahead looked like distance. The narrows were 200 meters ahead. The differential, under the increased load of acceleration on a downhill grade, pulling left against the driver's corrections, through its left side drive coupling at the entry to the narrows, with a sound that several members of the convoy would later describe as a small explosion. The vehicle lurched left and stopped, partially blocking the road, its nose against the drainage-cut wall. The column stopped. At the observation post, Lund made 3 small adjustments: scope, body position, breath rate, that together took approximately 8 seconds, and then she waited. Not long. Long enough for the confusion below to reach its natural peak, which was the point where the convoy commander would begin giving orders, and the attention of every person in that column shift to the commander and the blocked vehicle and the question of what came next. She took the second shot. The distance was 4,240 meters. The shot was not intended to be lethal. This was a detail that Wenn learned about 3 hours later, and that he had difficulty initially understanding, because it seemed to him that at that range, under those conditions, hitting anything at all was already beyond comprehension, let alone hitting something specific. What she had hit, and she had hit it, was the radio antenna array on the convoy's command vehicle, the third vehicle in column. She had chosen it because destroying communications was more disabling over the period of hours they needed than any single personnel casualty would be. An injured commander is replaced. A column with no communications capability and a blocked road and no clear picture of where fire is coming from makes decisions more slowly, and slow decisions were what she was buying. Holloway came to the observation post when it was over, when the convoy had stopped and its forward elements had begun somewhat chaotically to dismount and move toward the eastern tree line rather than the western ridge where Lund actually was. He stopped. I don't have a word for that. She was already breaking down the rifle, fitting components back into the case, with the automatic movements of someone who has done something so many times it has become muscular rather than cognitive. It bought us time, she said. How much? Depends on their protocols. If they follow standard procedure for communications loss under fire, they'll hold position and wait for orders from their next level command. That's probably 4 to 6 hours before anyone makes a decision to advance. She closed the case, long enough for the weather to come in. Holloway looked at the sky. The weather did come in reliably every 48 hours. They were at hour 43. You knew the weather was coming. It was a factor, she said. He wanted to ask how many of the things that had seemed like luck had actually been factors. He decided not to, partly because he suspected the answer would be uncomfortable, and partly because she had already picked up the case and was walking back toward the base with the particular economy of movement of someone who is carrying weight they have carried many times before. The extraction came 11 hours later, in a brief weather window that lasted just long enough. The convoy, as she had predicted, had held its position while waiting for communications to be restored. It had not advanced. On the helicopter, in the noise and cold, Wenn found a moment to sit across from her. She was looking out the window at the peaks going by, not at anything in particular. He had spent most of the past 11 days underestimating her, and he was aware of this, and I found that he did not know quite how to address it. In the end, he said only, "The antenna." She looked at him. "You could have taken the vehicle, or the driver." He paused. "Why the antenna?" She was quiet for a moment, in the way that suggested she was finding a way to explain something she had never had to explain before, because it had always seemed obvious to her. "If I take the driver," she said, "the next driver takes over and the column moves in 20 minutes. If I destroy the vehicle, they go around it in 2 hours. But if they can't talk to anyone," she turned back to the window, "they wait. And while they wait, we leave." Wenn sat with that. "You weren't trying to stop them," he said. "No. You were trying to make sure we got out." She didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Carvel, seated further back in the helicopter, had been watching this exchange without being able to hear it over the engine noise, and he leaned over to Ahrens and said, "What do you think they're talking about?" Ahrens had been thinking about the morning, about the way the rifle had sounded, and then sounded again from somewhere else. About the 8 seconds of adjustment before the second shot. About the fact that she had been watching Lund for 3 hours and still wasn't entirely sure she understood what she had witnessed. "I think," Ahrens said, "she's explaining something she's been waiting a long time for someone to ask." Below them, the convoy was still waiting. It would wait for another 2 hours before communications were restored and the order came through to stand down. By then, the base at Dunmore Ridge was empty. The foam pad was gone, and there was nothing left to indicate that anyone had been there except for 2 spent casings that Lund had left in the snow, side by side, with the patient tidiness of someone who leaves things in order when they go.